understood and locked as story architecture constraint for all subsequent parts. Part 9 will function as the emotional afterglow of the entire film, not a plot resolution but a silent human shift earned by parts 1 to 8. Every earlier beat will now be built as pressure, revelation, and moral tension moving naturally toward one restrained final image. The ending target is not Ethan publicly transformed, but privately altered. Not triumph, but recognition. The likely closing movement will center on a small symbolic action tied to the contract motif, perhaps the unsigned document resting beside a cooling cup of coffee, perhaps Ethan returning a fountain pen to Claire without words, perhaps Claire walking away while he does not call her back for the first time. The emotional release will come through what is withheld. Action first, emotion after. No explanation of what changed, only a gesture that makes the viewer feel it changed. His hand hesitates over the predatory clause he once admired. He crosses out a single line, slides the contract toward the fire, looks up. Claire says nothing. A faint nod. Rain against glass. A Swiss watch ticking in the silence. That silence becomes the climax. From part 1 onward, every scene will be engineered to earn that stillness. His arrogance must be believable enough to soften. Her intelligence must remain calm enough to feel dignified, never performative. Each twist must peel away power until only character remains. The final sentence will be a quiet moral that lands like an echo, not a lesson, something in the register of, some men lose billions before they learn the value of one honest voice. If you can read what powerful men overlook, you can change what powerful men lose. The laughter started before Claire Bennett touched the contract. It rolled low across the private dining room on the 82nd floor, where Manhattan glowed below like spilled gold, and every glass on the walnut table cost more than she made in a week. She had been pouring Ethiopian roast into crystal cups when Ethan Blackwood leaned back in his chair, silver watch catching the chandelier light, and flicked a leather folder toward her as if tossing a casino. Here, he said, amusement sharpening his voice. Settle a debate. If the waitress finds a flaw in a $2 billion deal, I walk away. More laughter. Men accustomed to moving oil, ports, and governments smiled into $1,200 bourbon. Claire froze only for a breath. Her hand rested beside the folder.
Calm.
Observing. The room expected embarrassment. She gave them silence. Ethan studied her the way powerful men often studied service workers, without really seeing them. 38, self-made, desert-born, and Manhattan-forged, he had built a reputation by testing people the way others tested steel. Push until weakness showed. By what resisted. Yet something in the waitress unsettled him. It wasn't beauty. It was stillness. The kind that didn't bend.
Go on, he said.
Humorous. Claire opened the contract. Fine paper. London Drafting. Sovereign Infrastructure Fund. Her eyes moved once down the page, then stopped. Not at the billion-dollar acquisition numbers. At a catering indemnity clause buried in boilerplate. A detail no one at the table had looked at twice. Outside, rain tapped the glass. Somewhere below, a siren drifted up from Fifth Avenue. She lifted her gaze. Why, she asked softly, would a sovereign fund ask for control rights through a catering liability rider? The laughter died, as if someone had cut power. One investor frowned. Another reached for the document. Ethan did not move. Explain, he said. Claire set the coffee pot down with deliberate care. Section 14 references service indemnity, but cross-links to maritime collateral in Appendix C. If signed, default exposure transfers Port Authority rights through arbitration in Doha. No one breathed. Ethan's half-smile vanished. He took the contract from her hands and read again. Slower this time. The clause was there, hidden in legal fog. Elegant. Predatory. His lead counsel muttered something under his breath. One of the Arab delegates shifted in his chair. Claire stepped back as though returning to invisibility, but the room no longer allowed it. Ethan looked up. Really looked. Her white blouse sleeves were rolled once. A faded burn mark near her wrist, maybe from a kitchen tray. No jewelry except a thin silver ring. Not nervous. Not proud. Only composed. Who taught you to read structured acquisition traps? He asked. Claire gave the faintest trace of a smile. Sometimes bad contracts teach better than good schools. She turned to refill another cup, as if she had merely corrected a dinner order. But Ethan was no longer hearing the room. He was hearing a single dangerous thought. The joke had not exposed the waitress. It had exposed him. He watched her cross the room carrying coffee through billionaires who suddenly seemed smaller than before. And for the first time that night, Ethan Blackwood let the unsigned contract remain closed in front of him. The rain pressed harder against the glass. Somewhere in the silence, the trap had already changed sides. The oldest man at the table was the first to break the silence. Read the appendix, he whispered to counsel, but Ethan was already doing it, one finger tracing the clause Claire had found. The room that had moments ago floated on expensive laughter now carried another sound entirely, pages turning. Claire moved through it quietly, collecting untouched cups as if she had not tilted a $2 billion negotiation with one sentence. But Ethan could not return to the deal. His instincts, the ones that built empires, were awake now. Who drafted this? He asked. No one answered fast enough. That was answer enough. He closed the folder. Softly, deliberately. Dinner is over. The investors protested in polished tones, talking timing, markets, political implications. Ethan rose. 6'2", measured, immaculate in a charcoal suit that looked cut into him, yet something colder had entered his composure. Gentlemen, he said, if a waitress found what my legal team missed, we are not discussing a deal. We are discussing a warning. No one argued after that. One by one they gathered papers, watches flashed, chairs moved, and the room slowly emptied until only rain, dim amber light, and the scent of cooling coffee remained. Claire was stacking saucers when Ethan approached. He set the contract beside her tray.
Seat.
She did not. I am working.
So am I, he said. She almost smiled at that.
Almost. He studied her in the hush that follows embarrassment. You knew what you were reading in under 10 seconds. Closer to 7. And you're serving coffee on the night shift. Both can be true. Ethan rested his hand on the chair back, but did not sit either. It felt less like questioning now, more like trying to understand a locked room. Harvard, he asked. Yale? Neither. She picked up a linen napkin and folded it with absent precision. Then where does a waitress learn sovereign arbitration traps? Claire looked toward the rain-streaked skyline. From surviving one. That landed heavier than anything spoken over dinner. Ethan said nothing for a moment. He noticed her fingertips pause against the silverware when she answered. A scar beneath composure. A history withheld. You knew this structure before tonight. Yes.
Who used it?
Her eyes returned to him, calm but sharpened. Someone richer than your guests. The words should have sounded dramatic. Instead, they sounded tired. Ethan was not used to mystery. He could not buy open. Yet what unsettled him more was not what she knew. It was what she refused to perform.
No triumph. No hunger.
No effort to leverage what had happened. Most people, after impressing Ethan Blackwood, angled for an opportunity. Claire resumed aligning spoons. Your driver is waiting downstairs, she said. A dismissal almost. Ethan reached inside his jacket and laid a business card beside the contract. Heavy stock. Private line embossed in silver. Come work for me. Claire glanced at it, but did not touch it. You assume I want to be near men who turn intelligence into party entertainment. The words were gentle.
They cut anyway.
Ethan gave a breath that might have been a laugh, though quieter than laughter deserved. Fair. He started to leave, then stopped. Why warn me? Claire looked at the unsigned contract. Because traps only work when pride signs first. He stood still for a long second, as if the room had narrowed to that sentence alone. Then he walked toward the elevators carrying nothing. Not the contract. Not his card. He left both on the table. Claire watched the silver doors close on his. Reflection. Only after he was gone did she turn the business card over. On the blank back, in quick fountain pen ink, he had written one word.
Why?
Claire looked at it for a while, then slipped it into her apron beside the order pad. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson. Inside, a question had begun where a joke had ended. At 2:15 in the morning, Claire left through the service entrance into rain that had softened to silver mist. Midtown hummed in that strange hour when black cars glided like shadows and even ambition seemed quieter. She pulled her coat tighter and walked 3 blocks to the subway, Ethan's card still in her apron pocket, heavier than paper should feel. She told herself she would throw it away. She did not. Across town, on the 46th floor of Blackwood Capitol, lights burned where no lights should have been at that hour. Ethan stood before a wall of glass, tie loosened, reading the same contract for the 7th time. Not because he doubted the trap, because he doubted himself. Beside him, his chief counsel Daniel Mercer adjusted his glasses and said what no one usually dared say. "She saved you." Ethan said nothing. His thumb moved once over the fountain pen, lying near the unsigned agreement. "Find out who Claire Bennett is." Daniel hesitated. "Personally or professionally?" Ethan looked toward the river. "That is the problem. I do not know yet." By morning, a quiet inquiry had already begun. But Claire was nowhere the inquiry expected. No law firm records. No bar registration. Community college transcripts ending 12 years earlier. Restaurant payroll. Modest apartment in Queens. It did not fit the woman who could dismantle a sovereign trap in 7 seconds. It irritated Ethan the way an unsolved equation irritates a mathematician. By noon he was back where men like him rarely returned without reservation. The restaurant was between lunch rushes, sunlight falling across empty linen tables. Claire was polishing stemware when she saw him. No surprise crossed her face. As if Billionaire's arriving unannounced was merely weather. Ethan approached without entourage, without armor, carrying a slim folder. "You came back for your contract?" she asked. "I came back for the question you did not answer." She waited. "Who used that structure against you?" Claire set down the glass. "Why does it matter?" "Because if someone built that trap once, they may build it again." She studied him, not his suit, not the watch, but the fatigue around his eyes. Something had shifted overnight. Less command, more tension. She gestured toward a booth near the window. 5 minutes. Ethan sat across from a waitress for the first time in his life, without feeling he was granting a favor. Claire slid the folder toward him before he opened his own. Inside was a photocopy of an old arbitration filing, edges worn. "Read page 6. Ethan scanned, then looked up sharply. The Shell Corporation listed in the filing was tied to a fund his father had nearly partnered with 20 years earlier. This was buried. "Buried on purpose," Claire said. "And the woman who challenged it lost everything." "You." Claire did not answer directly. She stirred untouched coffee. Some truths survive better unnamed. The old N3 silence settled. Not empty. Charged. Ethan watched steam curl between them. "You knew about my father." "I know enough to know his caution built your empire." That startled him more than the legal file. Few people spoke of his father. Fewer understood him. "Why show me this now?" Claire looked out the window, where pedestrians moved through afternoon drizzle. "Because last night you closed the contract." She turned back. Most men would have signed. Something almost like shame crossed Ethan's face. He was used to admiration, suspicion, envy, not being measured by restraint. He reached into his jacket and placed a check on the table. Consulting fee. 5 figures. Claire slid it back, without looking. "Keep your money." "Then what do you want?" she asked, almost whispering, for once. The question lingered longer than any answer could. Ethan looked at the rain, then at the woman who had twice unsettled his certainties. The truth. Claire gave the faintest nod. Not agreement. Permission. She rose as another table signaled for service. Before leaving, she tapped the old arbitration file once. Then stop. Looking at the trap. She paused. Start looking at who benefits when smart men feel untouchable. Ethan watched her walk away through ordinary lunch traffic carrying water glasses, moving again like someone invisible. But invisibility, he was beginning to understand, was sometimes where the sharpest minds chose to hide. 3 days later, Ethan stopped sleeping well. Not because of markets, because patterns once invisible now appeared everywhere. Minor clauses, offshore aliases, advisory fees routed through names too clean to be honest. The old arbitration file Claire had shown him sat open on his desk beside a cooling espresso, marked in red. At dawn he noticed it. The same shell structure hidden inside a pending infrastructure merger his board planned to approve Friday. Not similar. Identical. His pulse did not rise. It narrowed, the way it did before a hostile takeover. He called Daniel Mercer before sunrise. Cancel the board vote. On what grounds? Daniel asked. Ethan looked at the marked pages. Fraud wrapped in etiquette. By 9, the executive floor moved under quiet panic. Analysts rushed. Compliance teams reopened dormant audits. Yet Ethan said nothing about Claire. Her name remained private, almost protected. By noon he stood before 12 board members who had never seen him delay a billion-dollar expansion. One director protested. Another warned of reputational fallout. Ethan listened, then placed the old arbitration filing beside the new merger documents. We are not postponing growth, he said. We are declining bait. The room went still, but one face did not. Victor Ramon, a senior partner brought in months earlier, folded his hands too slowly, smiled too little. Ethan saw it. Claire's question returned like a bell. Start looking at who benefits when smart men feel untouchable. After the meeting, Ethan did something stranger than canceling a merger. He walked 10 blocks in the rain to the restaurant without calling ahead. Claire was not there. Her shift ended early, another server said. He almost left, then noticed a folded note tucked under the sugar caddy at the booth, where they had spoken. No name, just handwriting he recognized. If he pushed into the archives of Blackwood Shipping before 1998, he would find a trust agreement your father refused to sign. Ethan read it twice.
No signature.
Only a small coffee stain on the corner, as if even the note carried her symbols. That night, he went to company archives stored in a climate-controlled basement under the original Blackwood building downtown. Old ledgers. Microfilm.
Das no Billionaire touched.
For 2 hours he searched alone. Then he found it. A trust proposal rejected by his father 23 years earlier. Same hidden arbitration language. Same shell route. Same foreign intermediary now tied to Victor Ramon. Ethan leaned back slowly in the archive chair. His father had seen the trap, walked away, and somehow the trap had returned through Ethan's own boardroom. For the first time in years, he removed his Swiss watch and laid it on the table as if time itself had become suspect. He understood now why Claire had not spoken in triumph. Because revelation was rarely loud. It arrived in old paper and delayed recognition. The next morning, Ethan asked Daniel for a discreet background trace, not on Claire, but on Victor. What returned by evening was enough to chill even Daniel's practiced calm. Side entities. Quiet kickbacks. A pattern hidden inside respectable signatures. Ethan stared at the report while city lights blurred beyond glass. Then his private line rang. Unknown number. He answered. Silence first. Then Claire. Do not confront him tomorrow in the board vote. Ethan straightened. You know about tomorrow? I know men like him panic when exposed too early. Her voice remained soft, almost lost beneath static. Let him believe you still trust the deal. Ethan looked at the report, then at the unsigned fountain pen lying beside it. You are asking me to stage weakness.
No, she said.
I am asking you to let arrogance keep talking. He almost smiled. You have done this before. A pause. Longer this time. I survived it before. The line clicked dead before he could answer. Ethan remained still with the phone in hand, hearing only the low hum of the city and his own breathing. On the desk lay 2 documents. 23 years apart, carrying the same deception. Beside them sat a waitress's warning written in pencil. He touched neither. Only watched rain slide down the glass. Somewhere in that slow movement, he felt something unfamiliar to power. Trust, arriving not through control, but through listening. The board vote began at 10 sharp beneath brushed steel lights and a wall-sized map of global shipping routes glowing blue. Ethan entered with no trace of the unrest that had kept him awake.
Calm.
Measured. Almost colder than usual. Victor Ramon noticed and relaxed. That was the first thing Ethan wanted. Let arrogance keep talking. Claire's words moved quietly beneath every thought. Directors assembled. Assistants placed binders. Coffee steamed untouched. Ethan opened the meeting by recommending the merger proceed to discussion, and Daniel Mercer nearly looked up in surprise before catching himself. Victor spoke first, smooth as polished marble. Growth projections. Port access. Sovereign guarantees. Numbers flowed like certainty. Ethan let them. Asked almost no questions. A few directors visibly softened, believing the storm had passed. Victor leaned into confidence, too comfortable now. That was when Ethan slid a single-aged trust agreement across the table. 1997. His father's rejected deal. Interesting language, Ethan said lightly. Especially Clause 14. Victor's fingers stopped.
Barely.
But Ethan saw it. So did Daniel. Coincidence, Victor replied. Ethan nodded as if accepting it, then placed the current merger draft beside the old agreement. 2 pages marked in red. Same clause.
Same shell path.
Same hidden control rights. The silence that followed did not feel dramatic. It felt surgical. One director removed his glasses. Another whispered something no one answered. Victor attempted explanation, but his voice carried strain now. Ethan did not raise his own. He simply asked, "How many times have you sold my board the same trap under different names?" No one moved. The question did what accusation never could. It let truth reveal itself through discomfort. Compliance officers were summoned. Voting was suspended. And in the quiet, unraveling that followed, Ethan felt no triumph. Only an odd heaviness. His father had once stepped away from this. He had nearly stepped into it. By late afternoon, the boardroom emptied, leaving legal teams behind and sunset burning copper across the Hudson. Daniel approached slowly. "You trusted a waitress over your own senior partner." Ethan looked toward the city.
No.
A pause. "I finally distrusted certainty." That evening, he walked again to the restaurant.
No car this time.
No security. Rain had cleared, and the streets smelled of stone after water. Claire was closing side tables when he arrived. She glanced up once, reading his face before he spoke. "You let him talk," she said. Ethan gave the smallest nod. And he hanged himself with his own paperwork. Something almost warm passed through her expression, though it vanished quickly. Ethan reached into his coat and set a folded envelope on the table. Not a check. A legal reinstatement packet. State Bar sponsorship papers. Her old professional standing, dormant for years, restored through quiet petitioning Daniel had arranged that afternoon. Claire did not touch it. Why would you do this? Because some losses were engineered. He looked at the envelope, not at her. And some should be undone. Her hand rested beside the papers, but did not claim them. "You assume I want that life back."
No.
He met her eyes. "I assume it should be your choice." For a long moment, neither spoke. Restaurant lights dimmed one row at a time. Somewhere a dishwasher hummed in back. Ordinary sounds surrounding something neither named. Then Claire asked, "What happened to Victor?" Ethan turned his father's fountain pen once between his fingers. He signed his own resignation. She almost laughed. "Almost. You are learning restraint. I had a difficult teacher." At that, she finally touched the envelope, not opening it, just placing her fingertips lightly on top, as if testing whether old futures could still breathe. Ethan noticed a small burn mark on her wrist again, the same one he had first seen while being mocked by his own arrogance. Funny what memory chooses. As he prepared to leave, Claire called after him. "Ethan." He turned. "Why did your father refuse the deal all those years ago?" Ethan considered, then said quietly, "He told me once that contracts reveal character in the margins." Claire held his gaze, then looked down at the envelope. Sometimes so do people. Ethan walked out into the cooling night, carrying less than he brought. Behind him, through the window, he saw Claire standing still beside the reinstatement papers, one hand resting over them as though over something fragile. He did not wave. She did not call him back. But as he crossed the street, He realized the first trap she exposed was never in a contract. It was in the habit of believing power meant seeing clearly. The envelope sat unopened in Claire's apartment for 4 days beside a chipped ceramic mug and a stack of library books on maritime law. She passed it each morning without touching it, as if old identities could wake if stared at too long. Outside her queen's window, elevated trains rattled by in silver flashes. Inside, memory moved louder. On the 5th morning she opened the packet. Reinstatement forms, court sponsorship letters, a note in Daniel Mercer's formal hand. Eligibility restored upon petition. At the bottom, a single handwritten line, not Daniel's. The door remains open.
No signature.
She knew whose hand wrote it. Across Manhattan, Ethan had returned to routines that no longer fit the same. Board meetings resumed. Markets stabilized. Victor Ramon disappeared into quiet legal ruin. Yet Ethan kept finding himself pausing over small things once beneath notice. A server's trembling hand. A clause buried in page 47. The way silence in negotiations sometimes concealed more than speeches. Change, he was discovering, rarely announced itself. It altered what one noticed. Late Thursday afternoon, Daniel entered Ethan's office, carrying a file. "There is something you should see." Inside was an old disciplinary record tied to Claire. Not misconduct. Whistleblower retaliation, disguised years earlier as breach of fiduciary protocol. She had exposed fraudulent maritime derivatives at 28. The case collapsed politically. Her career collapsed with it. Ethan read the file once. Then again. Slower. She did not survive a trap, he said quietly. She was sacrificed to stop one. That evening he went to the restaurant and found Claire absent. Her manager said she had taken unpaid leave. For reasons no one knew. Ethan stood a moment in the doorway longer than necessary, listening to dishes clatter, to ordinary life moving without revelation. Then he left. The next morning a black sedan stopped outside a modest courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Claire stepped out in a navy coat she had not worn in years, legal packet in hand. She had not told Ethan she was coming. Yet when she entered the marble lobby, he was there by a window overlooking Foley Square. No tie, only a charcoal suit and the old fountain pen in his pocket. She stopped. "You had me followed?"
No.
He looked almost amused. "I guess pride would bring you alone." A faint breath of laughter escaped her. First time he had heard it. Real. They sat outside a reinstatement review before a quiet ethics panel that lasted less than an hour. Questions were asked. Old records corrected. A suspension erased that should never have existed. No grand vindication. Just signatures. A clerk stamping documents. A life quietly returned through bureaucracy. Yet when Claire stepped out into autumn light, she held the folder to her chest as though it weighed more than paper. Ethan did not congratulate her. He only walked beside her down courthouse steps where yellow leaves gathered in corners. "What now?" he asked. Claire looked across the street where a food cart steamed in cold air. "I do not know." That sounds honest. It sounds terrifying. They crossed for coffee from a street vendor, not crystal cups this time, only cardboard and sugar packets. Ethan stirred as absent-mindedly. Claire watched him and said, "The first night you tossed me a contract like a joke. I remember. You have not tried to control a room since." He looked at the coffee lid. Control and understanding are not the same thing. She studied him as if measuring whether the sentence belonged to the billionaire or the man becoming visible beneath him. Then she asked what she had not asked before. "Why did you really restore my license?" Ethan was quiet long enough for taxi horns to fill the space. Then, because some debts cannot be repaid with money. She lowered her eyes. A small movement, yet heavier than speech. As they stood there, Daniel called Ethan with news that a federal inquiry had opened wider than Victor alone. Others would fall. Ethan ended the call and slipped the phone away. Claire noticed he did not even mention the victory. Once he would have led with conquest. Now he watched a paper cup steam into cold air. Before they parted, Ethan removed his father's fountain pen and offered it. "For your first contract back." Claire did not take it at once. Her fingers hovered, then closed over the pen with care almost ceremonial. "Not possession. recognition. When she looked up, neither smiled. They did not need to. A gust lifted leaves across the sidewalk. The city moved around them, indifferent and immense. Yet for a brief second both stood utterly still, two people held by the quiet after something broken had been gently restored. And Ethan understood, watching her tuck the pen into her coat pocket, that redemption often arrives not when a life is returned, but when someone trusts you to hand it back. 2 weeks later, Claire Bennett stood in a glass conference room 30 floors above the harbor. No apron now, no order pad, only a navy suit and Ethan's father's fountain pen resting beside a legal pad. Morning light moved across the water in long silver bands. Blackwood Capital's compliance team waited for her assessment of dormant contracts tied to the federal inquiry. Some still looked at her as the waitress who had appeared from nowhere. Others had started to understand she had been nowhere accidental. Claire read in silence for almost 10 minutes before speaking. Clause 21 does not protect the lender. She tapped once with the pen. It protects whoever plans to leave first. The room shifted. Ethan watched from the far end of the table and did not interrupt. He had invited her as independent counsel, not employee. A distinction she noticed. Respected. When the meeting ended, directors drifted out in subdued conversation. One older board member paused beside Ethan and murmured, "Your sharpest advisor once carried coffee trays." Ethan answered without irony, "She still carries more than most of us." Claire pretended not to hear, but she did. That afternoon they walked through the old shipping terminal Blackwood's grandfather had built along the East River, brick walls weathered by salt and decades. Ethan wanted her opinion on converting part of it into a maritime ethics institute funded from penalties recovered in the investigation. A gesture he would once have called impractical. They moved through empty halls where dust floated in shafts of light. At one rusted office door, Claire stopped. Framed inside hung a faded photograph of Ethan's father standing beside longshore workers, sleeves rolled, no tie.
Ordinary. Human.
Ethan looked at it a while. He believed commerce without conscience was only theft wearing a suit. Claire smiled faintly. "I think I would have liked him. He would have hired you on site." They continued upstairs where harbor wind pushed through cracked windows. There Claire noticed a file left on a drafting table. Her old whistleblower case. Reopened. With names above Victor Ramon, names larger than either expected. "You did not tell me this widened." Ethan leaned against the window frame. "I wanted to be certain before burdening you." "Or before losing control of the narrative?" she asked, not unkindly. Ethan gave a small breath that might once have turned defensive. "It did not. Perhaps both." Claire read further, then froze at one signature tied to the original retaliation. A former mentor. The man who had abandoned her case years ago. Pain moved across her face, so briefly most would miss it. Ethan did not. "We can leave it closed," he said quietly.
No.
She shut the file. Silence protected enough. Evening came amber over the river. They sat on wooden crates overlooking tugboats moving slow below. No billion-dollar strategy now. Only fatigue and salt air. Ethan handed her a paper cup of diner coffee he had brought from the street, a private joke neither explained. Claire laughed softly when she saw it. From crystal to cardboard. "An upgrade," he said. After a while she asked, "Why create an ethics institute?" Ethan looked toward the harbor cranes. "Because my father left me ships." A pause. "You reminded me what they should carry." She said nothing, only traced the rim of the paper cup. Then from the stairwell Daniel Mercer appeared, slightly breathless. Federal prosecutors wanted Claire's testimony. Her old case could become central. The air seemed to tighten. Daniel left them with the news and withdrew. Ethan waited.
No persuasión.
No strategy. Claire stared at the river. "If I testify, they will reopen everything." "I know. And some people still powerful will hate it." Ethan nodded. Wind moved loose strands of her hair. She turned to him. "What would you do?" He considered long enough to make the answer feel earned. "What lets you sleep when the room goes quiet?" Claire looked away quickly, as if emotion disliked witnesses. Then she reached into her coat and removed the fountain pen. Set it in his palm. Keep it for tomorrow. Ethan frowned.
Why?
She stood. Because if I walk into that hearing, I want to sign with my own name. For a moment neither moved. Then Ethan closed his hand over the pen and understood the gesture for what it was. Not refusal. Trust returned stronger. As Claire descended the iron stairs alone, Ethan remained by the window watching dusk gather over cargo lights. Somewhere below a ship horn sounded low and mournful. He did not follow her. He only stood with the pen warm in his hand, realizing some alliances are formed not when people stand together, but when one walks toward risk, knowing the other will still be there when the door opens again. The hearing room was smaller than Claire remembered, almost ordinary in its fluorescent quiet, which made memory feel even sharper. A federal seal on the wall. Water pitchers untouched. Legal pads aligned too neatly. Yet as Claire took her seat before the review panel, she did not carry the guarded invisibility of the waitress Ethan first met. She carried stillness of another kind. Earned. Across the room Ethan sat in the public row, not beside counsel, not at the center, simply present. He had returned the fountain pen that morning without words. It lay now in Claire's hand.
The
proceedings moved in measured questions.
dates.
Structures. Offshore entities. Names once untouchable spoken aloud with almost administrative calm. Claire answered without drama, each sentence precise, the way truth sounds when it no longer seeks permission. Then came the moment Daniel had warned might arrive. Her former mentor, summoned as witness, denied knowledge of retaliation, denied abandoning her case. For a brief second the old wound entered the room. Even Ethan felt it from across the aisle. Claire looked down at the pen. Her thumb moved once over worn silver engraving. Then she opened a folder no one expected her to bring. Handwritten notes from 20 years earlier. Margin annotations in the mentor's own script tying him to the concealment. She did not accuse him. She only placed the notes forward and said, "I kept these because silence has a memory." No one spoke. The panel chair removed his glasses slowly. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten, not from tension but recognition. This was not vengeance. It was dignity refusing erasure. Hours later the hearing ended with no spectacle. Just record corrections, reopened prosecutions, and a recommendation naming Claire Bennett as protected whistleblower whose findings had prevented systemic fraud. Bureaucratic language for a life returned. Outside the courthouse, autumn rain had begun again, fine and cold. Reporters gathered at the far steps, but Claire exited through a side door Daniel arranged. Ethan waited beneath the stone awning, hands in coat pockets. She approached holding the fountain pen. For a moment neither spoke. Then she handed it back. "I signed with my own name." Ethan looked at the pen but did not take it. "Keep it." She hesitated. "It was your father's." "Today," he said, "it belonged to the person who finished what he began." Her eyes lowered, then lifted again carrying something softer than triumph. They walked in rain without umbrellas toward the old shipping terminal. No cars. No security. Just footsteps through puddled light. When they reached the terminal, workers were hanging a modest brass plaque at the entrance of the Ethics Institute.
No ceremony yet.
Only preparation. Claire stopped when she read the inscription. The Blackwood Center for Fair Trade and Public Trust. Beneath it, smaller letters newly added. Founding Counsel, Claire Bennett. She turned sharply toward Ethan. "You did not tell me. I was hoping you would object in person." "I might. I know." But she did not. Instead, she touched the cold brass with 2 fingers, almost as if checking whether this too could disappear. Inside, the old drafting hall had been transformed into a simple working institute, long tables, archives, students' desks waiting. On one wall hung the faded photograph of Ethan's father. On another, a framed copy of the rejected 1997 contract, Clause 14 crossed out in red. Claire laughed quietly when she saw it. "You turned a trap into a lesson." Ethan answered, "You did." Evening settled blue over the harbor. Daniel called to say prosecutors had accepted plea agreements from several major figures. The system had shifted. Yet none of that seemed central now. Claire stood by a window overlooking slow cargo lights. Ethan beside her. Silence again, but different from the first night. Not distance.
Rest.
After a while, Claire set the fountain pen on the windowsill between them, not returning it, leaving it, a shared symbol now. Ethan noticed rain tracing the glass beside their reflections. What happens next? He asked. Claire watched a tug move through dark water. Small, honest work. She said it as if describing something sacred. They remained there until the harbor lights blurred. No imbras. No grand confession. Only a quiet neither wanted to interrupt. And Ethan understood the deepest reversal was not that a waitress exposed a billionaire's trap. It was that in teaching him where deception hides, she had also shown him where meaning does. Winter came quietly to the harbor. Not with drama, but with thinner light and mornings that held their breath. Weeks later, the institute opened without cameras, without speeches anyone would remember. Students moved through the old terminal carrying casebooks and coffee cups, voices low against brick walls that once held cargo ledgers. Claire arrived early most mornings before anyone else, often setting a paper cup beside the window where the fountain pen still rested at day's end. Ethan sometimes appeared without warning, never announced, reviewing shipping ethics drafts at the long oak table as if he had always belonged in a room built more for questions than deals. They had settled into a rhythm neither named. One evening, after the last students left and the harbor turned steel blue under dusk, Claire was reviewing a student memorandum when she noticed Ethan standing by the framed 1997 contract. He held a red pencil. Slowly, almost absently, he drew a line through another predatory clause in a training copy, then set the pencil down. No audience. No gesture for anyone to see. Just a small correction. Claire watched from across the room and said nothing. A kettle clicked off in the tiny institute kitchen. Wind pressed lightly at the old windows. Ethan crossed to leave, then paused by her desk. There lay a contract draft from a student clinic, marked in Claire's handwriting. He touched the margin where she had written only one note. Look again. He smiled faintly, almost to himself. Then he noticed beside her papers the old leather folder from the first night, the one he had once tossed in mockery. She had preserved it. Claire closed it gently and slid it toward him. He did not open it. Instead, he placed a Swiss watch on top of the folder, unfastened, and pushed both back toward her as though returning something once governed by time and pride. For a long second, neither moved. Outside, a cargo ship horn sounded low over dark water. Claire reached out, not for the watch, but for the cooling coffee beside it, and nudged the second cup toward him. An ordinary motion. Yet Ethan sat. No words. They drank while snow began feathering against the glass. Minutes passed, maybe more. The room grew quieter until only the radiator hissed, and pen scratches from Claire's notes resumed. Ethan looked once toward her hand moving across the page. The same calm hand that had stopped a $2 billion mistake with one question. He rose at last to leave. At the door he turned, as if about to say something, then did not. Claire only lifted the fountain pen and placed it in the center of the desk between them. Not offered. Not withheld. There. Ethan gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, the kind people miss unless they are waiting for truth in silence. Then he stepped into the corridor. Claire listened to his footsteps fade down old iron stairs. She did not follow. After a moment, she walked to the window. Below, Ethan had stopped outside in the first thin snow. He looked up once. She raised the paper cup slightly. He answered by touching 2 fingers to the breast pocket where he once kept contracts. Then he walked on into the harbor dusk. Claire returned to the desk. The watch still rested beside the leather folder. It ticked softly in the quiet. She laid her hand over neither, only sat as snow whitened the pier and the room dimmed around old brick and new purpose. The camera of memory might have ended there, on a woman at a window and a man growing smaller in falling snow. But what lingered was smaller still. A crossed-out clause. A shared cup left half warm. A watch no longer worn to measure control. Sometimes the deepest reversals arrive not when power bows, but when pride learns to listen.